My true story, from New York. At my son's promotion party, they asked me to wait in the kitchen for a while. So I did, while quietly signing the house over to myself. Could someone tell her the kitchen's over there? This isn't bingo night. She's just here because she won't die. I mean, how long does it take for one person to go? I was standing just inside the entryway of my own house when I heard that. Not a rented hall, not a venue Brian had booked with his big new salary. No, our old home on Hamilton Avenue in Brooklyn. The house his father and I bought in 1981. The house I scrubbed baseboards in while carrying him in my belly. The house I paid the taxes on for 32 straight years. That house. I had dressed carefully that afternoon. My best navy blue skirt, the one with the delicate stitching I added myself. Pearl earrings Richard gave me for our 20th anniversary. I even curled my hair, just a little. I wanted to look presentable. It was my son's promotion party after all, a vice president now, some finance firm on Wall Street. Vanessa had told me they were inviting his colleagues, only a few dozen, she said. Just let us handle everything, okay? I asked her if she needed help with the food, the setup. She smiled, thin and tight. No, just enjoy the day, she said, in that tone that means the opposite. Then she added, just be sure to be ready by 6, and please, don't wear those orthopedic shoes. There'll be photographers. Photographers? For a house party? I should have known. When Vanessa plans something, it isn't to celebrate, it's to compete. She'd spent the past 5 years transforming Brian into her version of polished. New suits, expensive watches, a personal stylist, even a speaking coach. And now, this party was her big finale. When I arrived at the house, guests were already parked up the block. Most cars I didn't recognize. A valet, yes, they had hired a valet, took my keys and smiled at me kindly, probably assuming I was someone's grandmother who had wandered in. I walked up the front steps slowly, clutching the apple pie I'd made that morning. Brian loved my apple pie growing up, said it tasted like Christmas. I brought it, thinking it might end up on the dessert table. It did not. When I stepped inside, the house looked different. All my old paintings were gone from the walls, replaced with abstract art that looked like confusion made permanent. The furniture was sharp-edged and glossy. The scent of cinnamon that used to linger in the hall had been replaced by something artificial, lemony. Too clean, too cold. A group of women in stilettos stood near the dining room, sipping wine. One of them, pointing at me, said, "Could someone tell her the kitchen's over there? This isn't bingo night." The other laughed. "She's just here because she won't die." Then another, "I mean, how long does it take for one person to go?" I stopped moving. Not because I was hurt, no, not at first, I was confused, because the woman they were talking about was me. And the voices, one of them was Vanessa's. I stood there like a statue as Vanessa swanned over, her high heels tapping like threats on the hardwood. "Oh, you made it," she said with false cheer. "Listen, could you just wait in the kitchen for a while? We're taking photos out here and it's kind of full. You know how these parties get." She didn't even wait for a response before turning back to her guests. "Just wait in the kitchen." I had spent over 4 decades feeding this family from that kitchen. Now I was being sent to it like I was a stain on the carpet. I turned and walked slowly down the hallway. As I passed the living room, I caught a glimpse of Brian. He was laughing with 2 men in suits. He looked taller somehow. His hair slicked back, polished, just like Vanessa wanted. He saw me. Our eyes met. He looked away. Not a nod, not a smile, not a "hi, Mom," just nothing. I stood in the kitchen and placed the pie on the counter. Nobody else was in there, except a caterer who barely looked up. I stared at the familiar cabinets, now painted white and sterile. Vanessa had changed everything. No more chipped blue tiles, no more embroidered towels. This was not my home anymore. I wanted to cry. I felt the tears pushing behind my eyes, but instead I reached into my purse and pulled out a tissue. I dabbed, composed myself, and sat at the edge of a stool, out of sight, out of mind. I could hear them laughing, toasting. Someone tapped a glass and made a speech. It was Brian. "My success," he said, "is thanks to hard work and a vision for the future. I built this life from the ground up, and I'm not done yet." He built it? From the ground up? I built him. I worked night shifts to buy him his first suit. I skipped meals to afford his textbooks. I cleaned floors so he could go to college debt-free. And he stood out there in my house, pretending I did not exist. I sat in that kitchen for almost 40 minutes. Nobody came to check on me. Nobody offered me a drink or a seat at the table. Eventually, I got up. I walked toward the hallway quietly, staying behind the wall so they would not see me. I just wanted to hear something human, something real. That was when I heard Vanessa's voice again. She told me last week I used to rock you to sleep. What is this, a charity sob story? The only reason we let her stay is the tax break. Another voice. Once she kicks the bucket, I'm gutting this place, turning it into a Pinterest dream. Laughter. Loud, sharp, cruel. I did not move. I stood in that hallway, behind the corner, as invisible as they thought I was. But I was not deaf, and I was not stupid. They thought I was just some old woman who had overstayed her welcome. What they forgot, what Vanessa never bothered to ask, and what Brian chose to ignore, was whose name was still on the deed. And while they toasted to their new life, I reached into my purse again. Not for tissues, or something far more permanent. Brian was my only child, my miracle. After 5 miscarriages, after years of prayers and silence and pitying looks from women at church, he came into the world pink and screaming and whole. I carried him like glass. I rocked him until he stopped crying, even when I was too tired to lift my arms. And when his father, Richard, died suddenly from a heart attack at 52, I didn't fall apart. I couldn't. Brian was 10. He needed one parent strong enough for 2. I did everything. Sold the gold earrings Richard gave me on our anniversary to pay for Brian's textbooks. Took cleaning jobs I didn't tell anyone about just to afford his braces. I was the one who stayed up sewing the lining of his prom tuxedo when the rental arrived torn. I packed him lunch until the week he moved out. I never asked for anything back. Our home in Brooklyn wasn't just where we lived. It was our foundation. Richard and I bought it in the early 80s, back when the neighborhood was still filled with working-class families, and the sound of kids riding bikes past stoops. That house had seen winters when we couldn't afford heating and summers when we shared one fan between 3 rooms. But it was ours. We painted every wall with our own hands. Richard fixed the roof himself twice. We raised our son there. Every floorboard had a story. Then came Vanessa. I remember the first time Brian brought her over. She was polite, in a careful sort of way. Pretty, sharp-eyed, and full of ambition. She complimented the vintage charm of the house, but something about her tone made me feel like a museum piece. Still, I tried. I welcomed her with open arms. I even let her rearrange the living room to better suit entertaining. I didn't say a word when she boxed up my collection of family photos and replaced them with black and white cityscapes from IKEA. After their wedding, which they hosted at a vineyard upstate without a single family recipe in the buffet, they moved in. Temporarily, they said, just until they found a condo closer to the city. That temporary lasted years. Then one afternoon, Brian asked if we could talk. Vanessa stood behind him, silent but smiling. "Mom," he said, "there's an investment opportunity. The kind that could change everything for us, but the bank wants collateral. Real estate." I blinked. "So what does that mean?" He glanced at Vanessa, then back at me. "We want to add our names to the house, just temporarily. We'll refinance after the deal goes through. You won't have to move. You won't even notice a change." Vanessa added, "It's just paperwork. We'd never put you out." It wasn't the first time I had been asked to sign something for Brian. When he was younger, I had co-signed a student loan and later helped him qualify for his first car. He always repaid what he owed. So I said yes. I insisted on having the lawyer Richard once trusted review the documents. He confirmed the setup. My name remained primary. Their names were added for the bank's assurance. The agreement was limited. Revocable. Still, I made copies. I filed them in the drawer with Richard's letters. They got the loan. Brian bought into the firm. Vanessa posted about it on social media with a caption that read, "The beginning of our empire." The house began to change, slowly then all at once. The blue kitchen tiles Richard and I laid by hand were replaced with marble. The den where Brian once watched Saturday cartoons became Vanessa's content studio. My favorite reading nook was converted into a bar cart display. I adjusted. I told myself it was their time now. I stopped hosting Sunday dinners. Vanessa preferred reservations. I stopped baking my pies. Brian said he was cutting sugar. I started eating dinner in my room, claiming I liked the quiet. But I missed the sounds. I missed being part of something. They assured me I was. Every time I questioned it, they said, "This is still your home." But it no longer felt that way. I began noticing little things. Vanessa referred to the guest room as the nursery, even though there was no baby. Brian showed the house to a colleague as if it were fully his. I overheard Vanessa telling someone on the phone, "Once we update the paperwork, we'll have more leverage." I kept quiet. But I began to prepare. I reviewed the papers. I scanned them into a USB drive. I reread the conditions. I met with Richard's old lawyer again and asked him a question I never thought I'd need to ask. What would it take to undo a favor? And now here we were, a house full of strangers in heels and suits, laughing in my living room, Vanessa beaming like she'd won something, Brian acting like he had built this legacy from scratch. They did not know how many nights I scrubbed dishes until my knuckles bled. They did not know the sleepless nights I spent balancing budgets so Brian could have a birthday cake and new sneakers in the same month. They did not know because they did not ask, because I stopped reminding them. They assumed I was too old to care, too tired to act, too grateful to resist. But they forgot one thing. I never gave them everything, and now they were going to learn what happens when a mother remembers. I stood in the kitchen, holding the apple pie I had baked with my own 2 hands, my signature recipe, the one Brian used to beg for every Thanksgiving. I had even braided the crust edges the way he liked, brushing it with egg yolk to give it that golden brown finish. I set it gently on the marble countertop that used to be old butcher block, before Vanessa modernized everything. Now it looked like a magazine spread. Sterile, curated, cold. Vanessa had once called my pies quaint. Then she upgraded the word to outdated. And finally, last Christmas, when I offered to bake for the firm's potluck, she smiled and said, "Let's not. We don't want to bring the tone down." So I had stopped offering. But that morning, I had baked this pie anyway, maybe out of habit, maybe out of hope. Now it sat untouched, forgotten, like me. I stayed in the kitchen, hands folded in my lap. The sounds of the party hummed through the house. Clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, the low thump of music too elegant to dance to. I could hear Vanessa's voice rising above the rest, bright and chirping like a bell no one asked to ring. Then the words came, clear as crystal, cruel as winter wind. "This old hag still thinks she matters. If it weren't for the tax benefits, I would have tossed her out years ago." There was laughter, not polite giggles, real laughter. The kind that scrapes against dignity and leaves welts. She told me, "I used to rock you to sleep. What is this, a charity sob story?" My fingers tightened around the edge of the stool. "Once she kicks the bucket, I'm gutting the house, turning it into a Pinterest dream." Another voice, sharper and smug, "Well, tell her to die faster then. You deserve the space." That was the moment something inside me turned. Not snapped, no. It was quieter than that. It was like a hinge swinging shut, a door closing, a warmth leaving the room and taking something sacred with it. I rose from the stool, my back straightened, spine stiff as iron. I walked to the edge of the hallway and turned the corner. They were all standing there. Vanessa, in her champagne-colored cocktail dress, clutching a wine glass like it was a trophy. Her friends, 3 other women in designer heels and men with loosened ties, stood around her, all of them red-faced from laughter. I looked directly at Vanessa. Her smile faltered. "I may be old," I said, "but I'm not deaf, and you may be young, but you're already rotten." The room went silent. You could hear the air turn. Even the ice in their glasses seemed to still. One of the women coughed. Another pretended to check her phone. Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked past them, slowly, deliberately, like someone crossing a battlefield. No rush, no shame. Only the weight of 1,000 unspoken memories in my steps. I returned to the kitchen. I stood beside the pie. I didn't touch it. I simply stared at it, wondering when food had stopped being about love and started being about image. Moments later, Brian appeared in the doorway. His face was flushed. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "Mom," he said, too casually, "Vanessa didn't mean." I held up my hand. "Don't, not tonight." He looked at me like I had grown a second head. "I'm sorry," he said. "No, you're not," I replied. "You're sorry I heard it." He shifted his weight. "It was a joke, a bad one. You know how people talk when they've had a drink?" "Oh, I do," I said softly. "But I also know how people talk when they think the person they're mocking isn't worth the effort to whisper." He had no answer. I turned back to the pie and picked up the tin. "She said she's going to gut the house after I die," I added. "That's what she said, Brian." He swallowed. "Mom, look, this house, it's part of a plan. We're trying to grow. I'm trying to give her a life she's proud of." "And what about the life I gave you?" I asked, turning to him. He blinked. "I raised you in this house. I built your entire life from within these walls. I gave you everything I had, every dollar, every hour, every ounce of strength, and now I'm just a tax benefit?" He looked at the floor. I could feel my heart beating hard, but I wasn't shouting. I wasn't even angry in the traditional sense. I was tired, but beneath the exhaustion, a new energy was rising. Clarity. I set the pie down on the counter. I leaned in slightly. "Do you know what Vanessa doesn't know?" I said. "She doesn't know I never fully transferred the deed, that what you have is temporary, that I can change it back." His head snapped up. "But you wouldn't," he said, almost laughing, "right?" I smiled, not with warmth but with knowing. "I'm old, Brian," I said, "not stupid." And I walked past him, out of the kitchen, back to my room. That night I didn't cry. I didn't stew. I planned. I remember the first time Vanessa came to our house. She wore a soft pink blouse and smiled like she had rehearsed it in the mirror. She complimented my roast chicken, said the house smelled like love, and even asked if I needed help with dishes. She told me she had always respected older women, said her own grandmother raised her while her mother worked. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I remember thinking, maybe Brian found someone who understands family. But a smile can be a disguise. After their wedding, things changed gradually, not all at once, just enough for me to start wondering if I had misread everything. Vanessa stopped asking if I needed anything. Instead, she started assuming that I would clean up after their dinners, that I would watch the baby for a bit while she ran errands that turned into full-day excursions. Then came the second child. More assumptions, more silence. "Can you keep them overnight?" she would ask, already halfway out the door. I never said no, not once. I fed them, bathed them, rocked them to sleep, even on the nights my own bones ached like old wood in the rain. One day I overheard her on the phone, laughing. "She's basically our live-in nanny," she said, "except, free. Nanny with no pay." That is what I had become. Not grandma, not mother-in-law, not even housemaid. An unpaid, unacknowledged, invisible service. I wanted to scream, but instead, I folded laundry, I made dinner, I waited. I told myself silence was safer, but silence does not mean I forget. I remembered every comment, every time she rolled her eyes when I suggested an old remedy for a child's cough, every time she scolded me for giving the kids too much sugar when I offered them a single cookie, every whispered remark about old people and their superstitions. She thought I was too slow to catch her meaning, too soft to fight back. What she did not know was this. I may have aged on the outside, but my mind was as sharp as ever. I remembered every conversation. I kept copies of every document. I watched, I listened, I learned. Richard taught me that. My husband was a quiet man, but meticulous. He kept records of everything: bills, insurance, deeds, tax returns. He treated paper like it was sacred. He used to say, "People lie, paper doesn't." So when Brian asked me to sign the house over, I insisted we go through Richard's old lawyer. I had copies made. I read every clause. I kept the originals locked in a safe deposit box, just in case. Vanessa once laughed and told Brian, "Your mom still keeps paper files like it's 1992. She called me analog. I smiled and offered her tea. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because I knew. I knew there might come a day when I would need those papers. A day when memory would not be enough. A day when I would need proof. That day was coming. The older I got, the bolder they became. I overheard Vanessa talking about renovations. Big ones. "We could knock down this wall," she told a contractor, "expand the kitchen into the guest room, and eventually, who knows, an in-law suite for us when we're older." I was standing in that very guest room at the time. She didn't even flinch. The house I built, the walls I painted, the rooms where I raised my son, they were already redesigning it in their heads, as if I were already gone, as if I were a burden to be planned around. But I kept the papers, I kept the title, and I kept every moment tucked away in the corners of my mind, like pins waiting to press into fabric. I was not going to explode. That was not my style. But I would not stay quiet forever either. Silence, when filled with memory, becomes its own kind of power, and I was ready to use it. Brian was glowing that night, that smug, corporate glow that comes from money, recognition, and forgetting who helped you get there. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, drink in hand, surrounded by men in navy suits and women who smiled without ever meaning it. His laughter was louder than usual, his gestures bigger, more theatrical. He had found his people, it seemed, and I was no longer one of them. He was telling a story about flipping properties, how smart money moves fast, how dead equity is just sleeping opportunity. His friends nodded along, one of them clapping him on the back like they were college buddies. Vanessa stood beside him, beaming like a CEO's wife. I watched them raise their glasses together. "Once the old hag's out," I heard one of the men say, "we can list the house, split the profit." My breath caught. My skin went cold. I stood very still behind the half-gua by the dining room entrance, heart hammering. Another voice, Vanessa's, too casual, said, "Why's it still in her name anyway?" Brian answered, low and dismissive, "It's just a formality. We'll sort it. Don't worry." And then, clear as day, from Vanessa, "Don't worry, she'll be gone soon, one way or another." The laughter that followed was quick and sharp, like knives hitting crystal. Nobody said anything after that. They moved on to something about a beach house investment in Montauk, but I did not hear it. I had already turned away. I climbed the stairs slowly, like a woman twice my age. Not because my knees hurt, but because the weight of what I had just heard was heavier than my body could carry. Each step felt like it was dragging years behind it. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door softly, locked it. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer in my nightstand. From inside my purse, I pulled out the small leather folder I had carried for 7 years. Tucked within were the documents Brian had once convinced me to sign, the title transfer, or rather, the partial title transfer. It was dated 2016. I remembered the day clearly. We had sat in Mr. Raynard's office, Richard's old friend, the only attorney I still trusted. Brian had been nervous, Vanessa overly polite. They spoke in hopeful tones about investments and futures, about how this was just a step forward. I had insisted we include a clause that kept my name primary on the deed, a clause that stated clearly that any further transfer of ownership required my direct and notarized consent. They signed it. They smiled. They thanked me, but they never asked again, because they assumed I had forgotten. They assumed I had grown too old to track legalities, too soft to hold boundaries, too sentimental to protect myself. They were wrong. I opened the folder and read the first page again. The notary stamp, the initials, the signature, my own, calm and firm, beneath a paragraph they never reread. I flipped to the copy of the deed, the line that listed the current legal owners. My name listed first, sole primary. Their names listed second, conditional, conditional. I stared at that word for a long time. It had always felt like a formality. Now it felt like a weapon. I stood and walked to the closet, retrieved the small fireproof safe I had kept hidden behind an old suitcase. Inside was a USB drive, copies of every document scanned and organized. I plugged it into my laptop and emailed the files to myself, then to Mr. Raynard with a short subject line, "I'm ready now." Then I called his cell. He picked up on the second ring. "Mrs. Carter," he said, surprised, "is everything all right?" "No," I replied, calm as ever, "but it will be." I didn't tell him what they said downstairs. I didn't tell him about the laughter. I didn't need to. The law didn't care about bruised feelings. It cared about facts, and I had them, in ink, in digital backup, in memory. After the call, I placed the folder back into my purse. I zipped it shut and sat back on the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I listened. I heard the party carry on below me. I heard the corks pop, the footsteps across my floors, the echo of voices planning a future that did not include me. But I knew something they didn't. I never gave them the house. I only lent them the illusion of control, and illusions, once broken, cannot be repaired. Ray was standing by the bookshelf in the study, quietly nursing a glass of something amber. Most people at the party did not know who he was, just another older man in a suit, blending into the background. But I recognized him immediately. He had not changed much. Thinner now, hair almost entirely white, but his posture was still firm. The kind of man who had spent a life reading fine print. He was Richard's best friend, the man who stood beside us at our wedding, who toasted us with a wink and a story about how Richard almost missed the ceremony because he got lost looking for the right tie. More importantly, Ray had been Brian's godfather and our family's attorney for 3 decades. He retired 5 years ago, but I knew he would not turn me away. I walked toward him slowly, past guests who barely noticed. He looked up as I approached. His eyes warmed, but his smile faded quickly when he saw my face. "Ray," I said quietly, "I need your help." He nodded once. "Let's step outside." We walked through the back door into the dark driveway, far from the music and the clinking of champagne glasses. The evening was cool and still. He opened the door to his car and turned on the interior light. "I brought the file with me," he said, pulling a slim briefcase from the back seat, "just in case." I looked at him, surprised. "You knew?" He nodded slowly. "I suspected. You don't invite a retired attorney to a party like this without a reason." He handed me the folder. I opened it. The documents were exactly as I remembered. Clean, complete, airtight. My original agreement from 2016, the conditional title clause, the notarized signature lines. And now, a new set of forms, a full retransfer of ownership, returning the deeds solely to me. No more conditions, no more borrowed trust. I took a pen from my purse. My hand didn't shake. "I want to sign it tonight," I said, "before midnight." Ray handed me a hardboard to lean on. He stood beside me like a wall, firm and silent, bearing witness. As I signed, something inside me shifted, not anger, not revenge. Clarity. Weight leaving. Truth returning. The sound of my pen against the paper felt louder than the entire party behind us. He notarized the signature on the spot, stamped it, dated it. He then pulled out another envelope already prepared. "Just in case," he said, handing it to me. I opened it. Inside, a formal letter of eviction, drawn on the grounds of breach of informal tenancy and abuse of trust. It listed Vanessa and Brian by full legal names. It included attachments, quotes from recorded conversations, a summary of witness statements, and a clear outline of their conditional occupancy. It stated in plain language that they were to vacate the premises within 72 hours or face formal removal proceedings. I looked at Ray. "Are you sure it'll hold up?" He didn't hesitate. "It'll hold. You never relinquished full ownership. You offered temporary occupancy under familial trust. That trust has been broken, and I'll testify to it." I nodded. Then I asked the hardest question. "Do you think Brian will ever forgive me?" Ray was quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said gently, "one day he'll understand. Maybe not now, but one day he'll realize what it cost you to let him make those choices, and what it cost you to stop letting him." I closed the folder, placed it back in my purse. My hands were steady. "Thank you," I said. "Not just for this, for remembering who I was before they made me small." He reached out and touched my shoulder. "You were never small. You just forgot how loud your silence could be." We stood there a moment longer, surrounded by crickets and distant music. Then I walked back into the house, not as a guest, not as a burden, not as a woman waiting in the kitchen. I walked in as the owner. And no one saw it coming. The next morning was quiet at first. The kind of Sunday morning that used to mean pancakes and cartoons and the soft shuffle of slippers across the floor. But by 8:17 a.m., that silence shattered. Vanessa screamed first. I was already awake, sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of tea, Earl Grey, no sugar. I had laid out the Sunday paper, untouched. I did not need the news today. I was the news. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, storming into the kitchen with a crumpled envelope in one hand and fury in the other. "Eviction? She can't do this! This house is ours!" Brian followed close behind, his face pale, still in his pajamas. He looked like a boy again, not the man who had stood in his pressed suit and bragged about real estate portfolios. I held myself back, just my son, caught, cornered, and suddenly unsure of what he thought he owned. He held the notice in both hands, reading it again, like the words might change if he blinked hard enough. "Mom," he said, voice hoarse, "is this real?" I looked up from my tea. "It is." Vanessa stomped forward, slamming the paper on the table. "You can't just throw us out. We have rights. This is our home." "No," I said slowly and clearly, "this is my home, but your name isn't even." I reached into my purse and slid the new deed across the table. Fresh ink, fresh notarization, the final signed transfer. From me to me. Vanessa stared at it like it had bitten her. "This has to be illegal," she whispered. "You're just an old woman. What lawyer would even—" "Ray," I said, interrupting. "You remember Ray, don't you? Brian's godfather, the man you said was too senile to be helpful last Christmas? He handled everything. He was at the party last night just like you wanted. You wanted guests." Vanessa looked like she had been slapped. Brian slowly sank into the chair across from me, the eviction notice still trembling in his hand. "Me," he said in a low voice. "This is my fault. I let it get this far. I didn't mean for it to." "But you did," I said softly. "You may not have meant the worst of it, but you stood by and watched. And when she spoke to me like I was nothing, you stayed silent." He lowered his head. "I never wanted to hurt you, and yet," I said, "you did." The room was quiet again. Vanessa was pacing now, muttering to herself, phone in hand. She was already trying to call a lawyer, a friend, someone who would assure her that the law could be bent to match her ego. But the papers didn't lie. The conditions had been violated, the trust broken, the rights revoked. They had 72 hours to leave. Brian finally looked up. "What happens after that?" he asked. "You find your own place," I replied. "You build your own home. Not with my roof, not with my walls, and not with my silence." His eyes brimmed with tears, but he didn't let them fall. Vanessa walked out in a fury, slamming the door behind her. Upstairs, I could hear drawers being yanked open, the beginnings of packing, the first signs of departure. Brian stayed in the kitchen. "I wish you had told me you were going to do this," he said. "You never asked me what I needed," I replied. "You only ever asked what I could still give." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He nodded, slowly, defeated, maybe, for once, listening. I finished my tea. As he stood to leave, I added, "You know what hurts most? Not the things she said. It's that you knew who she was and you let her speak for both of you." He turned back, eyes heavy. "I didn't know how to stop her." "You stop her by remembering who raised you," I said. "By remembering that your mother is not your burden. She's your beginning." He said nothing, just stood there for a moment longer, then walked away. I sat alone again, but it no longer felt lonely. Later that day, I opened the windows. The air smelled like spring. For the first time in years, I moved freely through my home. My home. I touched the walls without shame. I walked barefoot into the living room and sat on the couch without worrying about leaving a wrinkle in Vanessa's perfect staging. I breathed, and in that breath, I found something I thought I had lost. Not revenge, not pride, peace. They packed through the night. The next morning, I watched them load their luxury suitcases into the back of Brian's leased SUV. Vanessa refused to look at me. Brian did. He paused at the bottom of the porch steps. "Me?" he said. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "But sorry isn't a key. And this house, you don't get to come and go anymore." He nodded. One tear slipped out, but he wiped it quickly. As they drove away, I stood in the doorway in my velvet dress, the one Richard bought me on our last anniversary. I looked down at the steps where Brian used to leave his backpack, where I used to tie his shoes. I whispered, just loud enough for myself, "You wanted me gone. Now it's your turn." I stood at the front door, the same door where, 2 months ago, Vanessa had smiled at the photographer and said, "Could you keep her out of the frame? This is a family picture." The same door where I had stood with a pie in my hands and hope in my heart. but not today. Today, I wore the velvet dress Richard gave me on my 40th birthday. Deep burgundy, still soft, still elegant. It fit differently now. My frame was thinner, my shoulders more defined by time, but the dress held, just as I had. I stood tall, not out of pride, but because I wanted them to remember the last time they saw me this way, calm, composed, and unmovable. Vanessa was pacing near the car, her eyes red, her voice strained as she left voicemails for lawyers who were not picking up. Her designer heels clicked across the pavement like anxious Morse code. Her phone trembled in her hand. Brian emerged from the house, slower. His face carried something I had not seen in years. Not defiance, not ambition. Regret. A quiet, late regret that no speech could fix. He looked at me. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. I didn't speak first. The house was quiet now. No music, no clinking glasses, just the sound of boxes being wheeled down the porch steps, and the occasional door thudding shut behind them. The court had granted them 48 hours to vacate, but I had already worked with the local housing board to expedite the process. No lawsuits, no violence, just paper, just law, just memory, written and witnessed. The house now belonged to me, fully, legally, permanently, every title transfer reversed, every clause reinforced, every deception dissolved by the truth and a notary's seal. But I had not reclaimed all of it. I kept only half. The upper floor, the part Vanessa had once dubbed dead space, was now rented to a young single mother with 2 children. Her name was Elisa. She had applied months ago for a cleaning job Vanessa had advertised online. I remember overhearing Vanessa dismiss her after a 30-second glance. She doesn't fit our aesthetic. Now Elisa and her 2 little ones lived above me. I reduced her rent by 70% for the first year, not out of charity, but as a reminder that dignity can be shared even when respect is not. Vanessa had threatened to sue. She said the eviction was malicious. But when she received a package containing a flash drive with her own voice, recorded clearly by Ray during the promotion party, calling me a hag and talking about my death like it was furniture removal, she went silent. She never brought up the lawsuit again. Brian, however, did what I never expected. He asked to speak with me, privately. He came to the back porch at 4:10 in the afternoon, 10 minutes before their departure time. I was there, waiting with a cup of tea, watching the sun stretch across the fence Richard had built when Brian was 5. "Mom," he said, sitting slowly. "I'm sorry." I said nothing. "I got swept up," he continued. "Vanessa said a lot of things. She's persuasive. But I never stopped loving you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I took a sip of tea. "Love," I said, "is not a word, Brian. It's not a text. It's not a toast at a party." He looked down. "Love is not sending your mother to the kitchen and selling off her memories like second-hand furniture." He swallowed hard, his eyes shimmered. "I just wanted to give Vanessa the life she wanted." "And what about the life I gave you?" I asked. He did not answer. Before they left, I tucked a small envelope into the back seat of their SUV. I did not tell them. I did not need to. Inside was a single photo, a picture taken in this very house 28 years ago. Brian, age 7, fast asleep on my shoulder, mouth open, drooling on my sweater. I had been humming to him just out of frame. You could see the corner of the fireplace in the background, the one Richard used to clean every fall. On the back of the photo I had written, "If you still remember this moment, you might still have a chance to begin again. But don't knock on my door. Knock on your own heart first." As their car pulled away, slow, silent, and full of awkward goodbyes, I stood on the porch and watched. Vanessa never looked back. Brian did. Once. And I nodded. Not because I forgave, but because I had already finished remembering. I did not need revenge. I did not need applause. I needed truth. And I had it now, wrapped in velvet, standing on my own porch, in my own name. I walked back inside, closed the door, and exhaled. For the first time in years, no one would tell me where to go, what to say, or how to stay small. This house had heard every prayer I whispered, every tear I hid, every lullaby I sang when no one else was listening. It remembered me, even when they forgot. And now, so would they. Because I did not win by shouting. I won by remembering, and by never letting them forget. I did not need to take revenge with blood or noise. I only needed to remind them of one thing. I was a mother. I am still a mother. And a mother is never a guest in her own home. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt unseen in your own family or forgotten in a house you helped build, know this. You're not alone, and you're not powerless. Here at Grandma True Stories, we tell the truths that have waited too long to be heard, the quiet sacrifices, the silent revenge, the strength that never needed to shout to win. So if you believe memory is stronger than betrayal and that wisdom has no expiration date, subscribe to this channel, because when a grandmother speaks, the world finally listens. Subscribe now to Grandma True Stories and share this story with someone who still thinks the kitchen is where we belong. Our silence ends here.